So, welcome everybody to the latest episode of AK8 TV. Today we have another special guest, Mr. Max Bychkov from United States. Welcome, sir. Glad to have you.
Likewise.
During the weekend. And of course, Tony, who's always part of this episode or podcast. So, we want to talk about martial arts again. And we have a Kenpo expert here next to us. So, for those of you who don't know him, I think it's a good idea to have you introduce yourself a little bit and tell the people what art you have studied and who you studied it under.
My name is Max Bychkov, and I reside in Baltimore, Maryland, in the United States. And like mentioned, I'm an American Kenpo artist, study under Richard Planis, and to some extent Frank Trejo as well, but primarily Mr. Planis. Been doing it for pretty much as long as I've lived there, which is 27 years, so most of my adult life. And Kenpo's been my main art. Throughout the years, I started actually as a Shotokan, as a kid in Shotokan back in USSR. At about 8 years old, my brother signed up for karate lessons, so as any little brother wants to do, I wanted to do what he did. So I complained to my mom enough, and she signed me up too. And he got into it, then we trained for a little bit, but then the family decided to move to the U.S. So we just learned, like any hardcore karate school, it was just blocking, drilling, basics, and sparring. So, and I always felt the love for martial arts ever since I saw it. It just felt like that's something I wanted to do. And a matter of fact, when my mom took me to the class for the first time to meet the instructor, I was watching the class where my brother was, warm up, and they were stretching. So I said, "Oh, look what I can do," and I did a split. And he looks at my mom and he says, "Well, your son has two choices: either ballet or karate." And I'm no ballerina, so here I am. Here I am today. But we did that. Then we came to the United States, and my brother wanted to train again. So as soon as he got his driver's license, I was 12, he was 19. He signed up to a karate school, and it happened to be a Kenpo school. It was Jim Frederick's Kenpo in Towson, Maryland, and I wanted to do martial arts as well, but that was too far. I had no license. My mom didn't drive. My dad was working all day to support the family, so I found a local school that it was a martial arts school at a local community center, and I started training there because I could ride my bike there, or I could get neighbors or relatives to drive me over. And I didn't know at the time, but actually one of, Joe Palonzo's black belts, Stuart Hankin, was teaching sparring classes there. And he was, from in the 80s on the Budweiser team with Frank Trejo, Mr. Parker, Billy Blanks, Stokey Hill. That was, those guys were, pretty famous in the sparring, fighting back in the 80s. So I didn't know it at the time, as I was a young kid, but he was a sparring instructor. So we met and started talking. My brother would show me a little bit of Kenpo. So when I found out he was a Kenpo guy, I would say, "Hey, Stuart, can you show me this and that?" So he showed me. He didn't really teach me too many techniques, but he loved sparring. And I mean, back then he was in his prime. He was just, not national fighter. So we started sparring, and it was great because I had exposure to him. There was another guy that would teach Bando, and other guys would teach kickboxing, Aikido. So everybody had a class. Well, I wanted to do martial arts so much that I would take every class that they offered, and I got an exposure to many different martial arts. Got a taste of this, anything from Aikido. That they did judo, they did kickboxing, Bando, and I loved it all. I loved it all. I was in there, if I got to hit the bag, and anybody who wanted to spar, I'd spar them. All these guys were 25, 30 years old, and I was a kid, but I was pretty big, so they took me in, and that kind of, my size kind of got me in the door a lot sooner with adults, because they couldn't put me in the kids' class. I was, 3 times bigger than everybody else. So, 14, 15, 16 years old, I was working out with guys who were 25, 30, 35. And another guy that I met pretty early on too was Carl Petro, who was one of Joe Palonzo's original black belts as well, and he's a phenomenal fighter. And I didn't train as much with him as I did with Stuart, but he would coach me and give me pointers. And Carl, has great martial artist and a lot of knowledge and in the practical sense. So we had a lot of, as I was coming up through the ranks, I had a lot of Kenpo discussions with him, and he would say, well, I used to ask Mr. Parker this and that, and then he would ask me these questions. So from the beginning, it kind of got my brain stimulated. And he had some questions about, well, I wouldn't do this and that, and, I try to defend it from a Kenpo point of view. So, that exposure early on to various martial arts, I think was instrumental to me, because a lot of people take a certain martial art and, of course, what you do is the best. You know what I mean? So then your instructor says, what we do is the best. So you start believing that, and you want to have confidence in what you do. And yes, you love and you think what you do is the best, but I don't like to think of it as exclusively. What I like to say, what I do works best for me. But best is it's like food or music. It can be completely two different things. They're still masterpieces in their own right. But one guy says, oh, how do you listen to that? And the other guy says, well, I love it. It's like, anything else in life. And, hopefully if you're able to do more than one thing, it's more ammo, in your weapon. And, martial arts, you're training yourself to be a weapon. So, it's just better ammo, and, sometimes you need hollow points, and sometimes you need full metal jackets and whatever. So it's just more ammo in your, in your arm. And, so get back to that. We started, working out there, but I would come with my brother to the Kenpo school to watch him whenever he was bored, and he said, hey, you want to take a ride? During summer break was nothing to do, so yeah, I'll go with you. And the instructor there used to say, hey, well, how come your brother doesn't take classes? I said, I don't have a license. So he said, well, tell your brother to drive. My brother was like, no, I don't want to drive him, because then I have to drive him back. So I said to the school owner, his name was Jim Frederick, he was, a local Kenpo instructor. I said, I promise you, when I get my license, I'll come back and I'll sign up at this school too. So he says, okay, well, we'll see. So I would see him in tournaments, and every time he would say, remember what you said? I said, I'll be there. So I trained, with the group that I was with at the community center, but as soon as I remember I skipped school and went and got my driver's license on a Friday. And then Monday afternoon, I came into the Kenpo school. I was sitting on the stairs before the school opened. And he walked down the stairs and said, what are you doing here? I said, I came to sign up. I told you I'd be here. And he couldn't believe it. So we went on the mat, and I already had, my brother wasn't much of a, the intellectual into Kenpo. He just wanted to fight. Well, all the books and, manuals that he had, I would take and read. So between doing classes, at the community center and, the books and watching him do stuff, I taught myself a good bit of Kenpo. So we started, I started coming to classes, and I picked it up pretty fast because I already had, the basics down. And even though they weren't Kenpo basics, they were basics. And sparring, kicking, and punching. So I ended up staying at that system and, at that school, and staying with the system, staying in Kenpo. And this is early to mid-90s, the time frame. Then Mr. Planis, first time I met him, I didn't, I was still at the community center. I just watched the seminar. But I watched, and I loved the way he broke and explained it down. I always felt the intellectual attraction to martial arts as well. I think while it just looks like, controlled chaos, when it's done, and it should, on an intellectual level, there's a deep reasoning to why things work a certain way. And I just felt like it had to be there. It wasn't just, swing and hope to hit him first. Technique, and technique is, like a science and formulas. So I liked the way he taught it. Then, he left. Then in '94, Frank Trejo came to the school, and, he came a few times, and I took seminars with him, and I really liked his approach to, he would mix boxing and kickboxing, and it was, just felt like, something I like. Plus, from him knowing Stuart Hankin from the Budweiser team, I came and I said, Mr. Trejo, I trained with Stuart, and he said, oh, Stuart, how's he doing? Tell him I said hi. So, that kind of helped break the ice. And I every time Mr. Trejo would come in, I'd try to work out with him. And I always, had questions. I would see, I said, why do we do this? Why do we do that? And I would think a lot about the art. And he told me, he said, if you want to know the art, if you want to learn how to kick somebody's butt, he said, I can teach you. He said, I can teach you how to fight. But if you want to know the specifics of it, he said, you want Huck Planis. So I was very fortunate that next seminar that Mr. Planis came to teach, Frank was there with him. So when I came up, he said, here, and he introduced me to Mr. Planis, and he said, this is, who I want you to learn from, and, you're going to get what you need, and the rest is history. You know what I mean? I started, training with Mr. Planis and, Mr. Trejo as well, and he always used to say to me, that love the art and the science of it, but remember, it's a martial art. Keep the fighting aspect of it. And I think a lot of traditional arts, that's where they're lacking. They fall in love with too much with the tradition and too much with the technique and too much with just going through the motion, that they lose the martial aspect of it. And the combat is something that has to be pressure tested on a regular basis to make sure it's still there. And it's like a gun. You just leave it alone and never reshoot and never clean it. It's going to seize up and rust up on you, and it's not going to work like it's supposed to. So, that was in the early 90s to mid 90s. Then, once I, like I said, got on the road, got my license, I was a free bird, and, there was no stopping me. And I went to every seminar I could with Mr. Planis. I traveled. When you're a kid with no bills, you have a car with, have gi, we'll travel. That's our motto. And I traveled extensively, anytime up and down the eastern seaboard when Mr. Planis was in the area, and Mr. Trejo as well, and learned as much as I could, and stayed with it, and it's I strongly believe it's in my blood. So basically here I am, 27 years later, still at it, and not planning to stop anytime that I'm able to stand and do it. So that's my background.
That's awesome. I mean, all of us, we're part of the Parker Planis lineage. And talking about Mr. Planis, can you tell the audience maybe a little bit more about Mr. Planis, his person, his personality, and the influence he has had on you?
Well, Mr. Planis is one of the foremost, figures in American Kenpo. I think anybody who does Kenpo knows of him, about him, and most people know him as well. And he was very, close with Mr. Parker. They co-wrote the manuals together, which is what, most of the Kenpo world uses as the curriculum for the art. But to me, I tried pretty much every Kenpo senior out there, at least to meet them or to train with them or to see what they do and teach because I decided I wanted to do Kenpo. And I wanted to do it seriously. I don't like to do stuff, half-assed. If I do something, that's what I want to do, and I'm just my nature. Anything I do it to the best ability. So, what attracted me to Mr. Planis is that a lot of people are good at doing Kenpo in their own way. They say, hey, I can show you this and I can show you that, but his understanding of the system is second to none, and his ability to teach you the system so you understand it. If you take the time and you commit yourself, because it's work. It's work. It's not something that you just say, okay, well, I'll write it down and memorize it. You have to apply yourself like anything else. But if you do your part, I think he can open up the art through his teaching and through his understanding of the art like nobody else. Nobody else. I mean, it's really it has helped me become a much better martial artist, and by watching him teach and not just do the art, I've learned to be a much better instructor, and I'm able to convey the art much better by observing him. So he's a world-class martial artist. As an instructor, he's a phenomenal person because he's demanding and he has his standards, but that's what needs to happen, and he does not like we always joke, say, I will not lower my standards because you failed to raise yours. And that's I love that saying, and that's what we do. And I wish more people would. But he's become a dear friend over the years, almost like a father figure to me because of the age difference, and we're into a lot of the same interests. And this is like if somebody told me 30 years ago, or when we were 27 years, that I'll be friends with him or have a relationship like this, I wouldn't believe it, because the first time I met him, it was like meeting Elvis Presley. It was, wow, you couldn't believe it. He was there, standing there talking to you, and, you're just so nervous and so impressed, and, you don't know what to do. And then, here we are in Europe, doing, what he taught us and, having a great time and spreading the art. So this is, living a dream.
You said in the beginning you had some mixed martial arts, or martial arts you were starting with, different ones. And for me, it would be important, and I'm pretty sure that everybody who is a beginner would know, what is the most important thing, or what are not the most, but what are important things if you start doing the martial arts?
Well, back then, and I hate to say this because I'm not, that's what a lot of people who are older, they say, back then, and I'm not, but it's funny how life goes on, and we're kids to them, but it's still 30 years ago. Back then, I remember when the first UFC came out, and I was a kid myself, but it was still, it changed the game, and I think it did it for the better because, there's many opinions on this, but it definitely made people more aware of what is out there. And I tell people, I said, if you don't want to grapple, that's fine, but at least you realize that you can be taken down, and it's harder to prevent than you think by a trained person. They say most fights end up on the ground. Well, you can argue this all day, but a trained person will take you down if you don't know how to, counter it. That's for sure. And, if for anything else, it's good to cross-train and, check notes, work out with other people. I'm all for it. Back when we trained, there was a different instructor coming in, and we would always compare notes. We would say, hey, we have a Taekwondo guy and a kickboxer. They both kick, but very differently. And it was the man, not the art. And I still believe that. Like people say, well, is this the best system? I said, depends who represents it. So as an individual, you want to pick a certain thing, because if you try to do too much at once, you spread yourself too thin. So you want to have one base. But just because you're doing a certain thing and you have a friend in judo or you have a friend in boxing, I always tell people, use that opportunity. Say, hey, how would you attack me? If we got in the fight, what would you do? And just see if you know how to counter it. If anything else, you might learn a thing or two. You might, because every martial art has its attacks, and you get comfortable with it. Like grapplers, if you only grapple from a starting position hands-on, well, he might punch you in the face before he does that. And if you're not expecting it, you'll get hit. If you're a boxer and you're not allowed to grab and the guy takes you down, you're not used to it. So the more you have exposure, even in that sense, but, cross-training, and referencing can go beyond that. You have to be careful of people saying, oh, I did 25 martial arts and I'm a master of all of them, because, then that's a little sketchy. But I know plenty of fantastic martial artists that do 2 or 3 arts, and they can make them work, because ultimately it's on the person. So for a beginner, I actually welcome, like, if you can find a good gym that does, because it all boils down to basics. It all boils down to basics. In the old days, you hard style, so, you walk the floor up and down, you drilled your basics, you worked the makiwara, you did the conditioning, you did the sparring. You had to have the tools. Too many people now, and that's why, a lot of the traditional martial arts, when the UFC came out, they never made contact. They didn't know if the technique works or not. Everything works in class. Doesn't matter how good or bad. I always joke, even with Kenpo people. I say, how many times have you lost when you were doing 5 swords? You don't. You always win. Doesn't matter how bad you are and how good, the guy swings and he knows that you're going to do the technique, so he just stops and you do your move. And it's okay for beginner training because it teaches you position and an anatomic relationship with your strikes, but eventually this will never happen on the street. So if you get too comfortable with that and you start learning, extensions, and you do all this fancy stuff, but you don't know how to stop somebody who's just pissed off at you and wants to rip your head off, you're going to be in a big surprise. I say this all the time. I said a lot of people, when they get in the fight, they're going to be in a big surprise trying to do this on a person who doesn't know that it's karate. Because on the street, the guy doesn't know and doesn't care what it's called, what color uniform you have, what color belt you have, who your instructor trained with. He only knows he wants to kick your butt, and unless you do something and hurt him or prevent him, he's going to do it. And that's the important part, is that whatever martial art or school you start, whether it's Kenpo or anything else, check the background and and it can be hard sometimes because some people are just good con artists and they talk up a good game and they don't deliver. But you want to, like I tell people, it's still a martial art, war art. Just because you're not going into battle every day, you still have to train like you are. Because, some people say, well, I do it for the flexibility, and it's wonderful. But first it has to be a martial art, and then you can do more art and less martial. But, for me at least, I want to know that if my students walk out after the class onto the street, they can at least do something better than what they did when they had nothing. There's no guarantees. You don't know. People think it's going to be like the movies. 5 people come, you beat everybody up, the girl falls in love with you and everything is great. There's no guarantees in that, but at least you want to have a little bit better chance. I always joke, I said, that school is so bad, you did better before you did karate. It's true. There's sometimes you say, man, he's going to get killed. At least when you don't know nothing, you just cover up, hope they don't beat you up too bad or run away. Now you think you're a killer and you go out there, open your mouth, they're going to take your teeth out. So, whatever you do, you want it to be a practical art, and be honest with yourself. Say, hey, do I think I could do this on somebody who doesn't want it done on them? And doesn't want it done on them is the big part, because anything will work if the guy just stands there. That's why I tell you, you see people do demos and they're flying through and 100 miles an hour. I say, yeah, but the other guy's not doing anything. The other guy's not doing anything. It's like speed bag. You hit the speed bag because it just goes back and forth. So it still takes a lot of training, but it doesn't have arms or a heavy bag. So that's just a training tool so that you work on your timing, or where you work on your power. Or like with working on a body, you work targeting, and But if you don't practice like this, then it's just it becomes false confidence, because you think it's going to go like that all the time, and when the other guy doesn't give you the position, or blocks you, or hits you with the other hand, you're going to be in a world of surprise. So for any beginner, I think train. Be honest with yourself. Be diligent and work at it, and you're going to have bruises and sweat. But keep asking yourself, could I do this? Am I getting better? Do I feel more confident? Realistically, and try. Friends are great because they know you do karate and they don't want you to kick their butt, so they'll say, hey, I'm not going to let you go, and you learn right away. Say, hey, yeah, it's harder to get out of a hold when the guy is really holding you, but you get valuable experience. So Just apply yourself and work hard, and pick an art, but at the same time, no art has all the answers, or you might have better answers if you have, or if it's not. If what you have is better, then at least you'll have confidence and say, hey, you know what? I had a boxer, and I felt comfortable working with him, or a jiu-jitsu guy or whatever. So just keep making yourself better, one step at a time. It takes time. It's just like anything else. You can learn what to do in a very short amount of time, but how to do it and how to do it well takes time. And it's just like anything else, So just hard work and slow and steady, and get the job done. So that's my opinion on that. For any beginner.
So you mentioned that before, the internal of a human being or of the martial artist is more important at the beginning. You mentioned that before. What's going on, questioning himself. If you allow me just one more question, that would be like, you said, pick one martial art, which is definitely good advice. And also, like you in the beginning, I had to find myself. I began with judo, jiu-jitsu, whatever, and I find my way after many years to Kenpo. Now the question to you is, do you think it was like lost time you had when you didn't do the Kenpo stuff and you just searching around for things? Or would you say, no, actually, I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but still, would you talk about that if other people, like you said, should find themselves the martial arts they want to choose?
Not really, because I always tell people I try to have a positive outlook on life. If I do something and it goes good, I learn something. If it doesn't go good, I learn what not to do. So it's like a relationship. You can have a story like my parents. They met 16 years old and they were married for 50-some years. They just stayed together their whole life. But some people say, well, at 16 you don't know what you want. So you have a girlfriend, and you grow up, and then your priorities change. And at 25, you're a different person. So those relationships let you find out who you are yourself and what you're looking for. And then when you meet the person, martial arts is the same thing. You don't know, certain people just naturally love Aikido. They said, I love the flow. And some people say, no, I want judo. Some people say, I want to box. Some people are natural, flexible. Like me, I love to kick. I want to make it a point. So I'm not going to hit the guy. I'm going to kick him. I'm going to hit him in the head. I love kicking, so then as you learn, you say, okay, well, on the street, yeah, you can do it, but it's going to cost you. So, you become more, you grow up and you say, if a guy has a knife, you don't see it, you go do a spinning kick and you miss by a little bit, and he stabs you in the kidney, you die, and, this is not a tournament. So, but what I'm getting at again is, no, I don't think it's wasted time because you're gaining experience. And it's almost like, it's good to at least expose yourself to see, hey, what do these guys do? What do these guys do? Yeah, and yourself, your body, your interest. So certain arts will naturally appeal to you more than others. So once you do that, then you kind of go in a direction. So no, if you did, jiu-jitsu for a year, like I said, and plus you're getting experience. So if you face a jiu-jitsu man or a boxer, what to do? So don't be afraid. It's not well, I've never trained before and I have to make a choice for the rest of my life. And if I don't, no, you go a year or two, unless you're 80 years old to start with, it can be recovered. It can be recovered. And like I said, I think the benefits way outweigh the time lost. So no, don't be afraid to get into it and try it out. You might be surprised. Even after Kenpo, but give the art, like Kenpo is an art, I think that you need to give enough time to decide what you understand, because we have a saying, what's good for you now might not be good for you later. And, it's affected by time, experience, and logic. So, it's like a 15, 16-year-old kid thinks they know everything. Then they turn 20, say, well, now I know everything for real. And then 25, and then you say 30, maybe I don't know everything. So in martial arts, it's the same thing. The better you are, this weekend alone, I was here with phenomenal martial artists who have, just extensive experience in many arts, and they're some of the most humble people, because you realize that the more you learn, the more there is to learn. And there's a lot of people, there's a very famous Russian musician. He used to say, anytime I think I'm a genius, I go do dishes in the kitchen to remind myself that I'm just human, And it's kind of a humbling factor that, as you get better, you realize that what you know is nothing compared to what there is to know. And it's wonderful. I mean, it keeps you from, people say, aren't you bored of doing the same thing? I said, if you say that, you don't understand, especially Kenpo. Because I get more excited day by day teaching than, what I did 10 years and 15 years ago. So, in my opinion, just like fine wine, gets better with time, and, put in the time and put in the work, and you'll be rewarded. So.
I really like the conversation up till now, and two questions popped up in my head now. One for you, Tony. The first question I have for you, Mr. Bychkov, is if you had superpowers. I'd like to get back to the Kenpo world a little bit more. What would you change in the Kenpo world nowadays if you had superpowers? And the question I have for you, Tony, maybe I'd like to have you answer first so you can think about it for a minute while he's answering the question. The question to you is, you said you found your home in the Kenpo world. Why is that?
Well, that's more like an emotional answer I have to give, because it might not be the answer everybody wants to hear. But we often say we have this Kenpo family, and where the family is, there is home. And I think that's why I use this metaphor. I found my home in the Kenpo family, because it's much more than just the martial arts. I mean, we have those great teachers, we have those great personalities, and what convinced me, or what made me to be astounded about that, is how many humble people we have. Even the greatest masters, like Max said before, even the greatest ones, they still are humble, and they still are like they act like students if they have something new to learn. So, and I think that's the mindset that convinced me. That you said you painted the picture with the washing the dishes, that they always come back to those to the beginnings. They take a step back and say, okay, now I got new stuff to learn, and later on I pass that on to other people. It's not like I keep my secret, or I keep the things I learn and I stay and I stick with this this knowledge. No, I want to evolve, and also I want to give something back, and that's very important. And I'm pretty happy that I'm part of it, already part of it, and I'm looking forward to grow and to go on with that.
And well, to continue on that, actually, I'll kind of supplement his answer and question first before I answer your original question. In our lineage, as specifically, because I'm not going to speak for everybody who in Kenpo, there's many different flavors and ways of doing it and approaches and mentalities, but we do have the family, and that's what I love the most about it, is that I explain it to people. Like, I remember how I felt first time I met Mr. Trejo, Mr. Planis, and you have that wow factor, and it's like you can't believe you're there, and it's so cool. And you don't even understand how much information you miss in a seminar as a beginner. And every year as you go back and you watch it, you say, oh boy, and then you see beginners struggle, and you realize that, hey, you were that. It's like a grandfather. You have a grandfather who's this old wise guy that everybody looks up to, but then you sit one day and you hear him tell stories that he was just this kid, boisterous kid running around doing crazy stuff too. And you say, Grandpa, really, it was, all of a sudden he's like you, but just 80 years prior. So that's what I love, and that's the attitude I try to have. I try to help people, and we're all family, we're all brothers, just some are older than others. And when we say older, we mean old in the art, not how old you are physically, but how long you've been doing it, because two people can be 40 and one can be 20-year-old veteran and one can be 6 months into it. So that's what we mean by older. But we all care about one another, and we all want everybody to succeed. So it's not about how good I am, it's about how good I can make somebody else. To me, especially now, as you get higher up in ranks and in the martial arts, that becomes, a second emphasis, which almost, you get confidence. Okay, well, I know how to fight, and, especially people say, well, if you get into competition, what do you do afterwards? And I say, that's what you do, you teach. You share it. It's like having a child. They say, having a kid and then grandkids is the greatest feeling, and you want your kids to succeed more than you. Same thing with students. That's why I enjoy coming to these things. That's why we're all like family, truly are, and we care about one another, and you put in the time and effort to make sure that everybody is learning, from the beginners to the intermediate to the advanced. And like I said, we all learn from each other, because sometimes, you become more advanced, so you see everything from a trained point of view. Well, sometimes, like Sherlock Holmes used to say, when you exhaust all the possibilities that are probable, whatever is left with, however improbable, is the answer. And sometimes you have a crazy, a beginner would do something that a trained person wouldn't do, but it can hit you with it because it's crazy, but you don't expect it, or, just a different way of asking. So you learn every time you're on the mat. You learn every time you're working with each other. So this is very important. And yes, our lineage is very heavy on that. We're all, enjoy each other's company. We're all glad to be together, and then the whole weekend, it's not just about time on the mat, but, eating, talking, joking, and, and when we don't see each other, staying in touch, it's all part of it. And it truly is a family, and it's a wonderful place to be. And like I said, for me, I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. So, going back to what you had asked me, as far as if I had superpower in a way of, I guess, if I could maybe change history a little bit, or if I could change things, is the biggest thing I think in Kenpo is making sure that the people who are teaching are qualified. And I know everybody says this, but you know, a lot of people don't realize was Kenpo, Mr. Parker's Kenpo was his art, but also his business. And it's always a hard balance between, you know, doing what's right for the martial arts, but also, you know, being a businessman. And when the business is doing good, you want it to keep doing better, you know. So Kenpo grew very fast in popularity, you know, for many reasons, and, you know, with Elvis Presley exposure and, you know, Mr. Parker's own personality, because he was a very charismatic guy and he was traveling all over the place. And Kenpo took off, and there were more people who wanted to get in business than they, you know, that was easier and faster to do than become a proficient instructor. And then those people started opening schools and teaching, and their students started teaching, and they started opening schools. And yes, there were all schools that were paying for seminars and paying memberships and going to tournaments, so it was great on the business end, but on the martial arts end, all of a sudden you have a lot of people who don't know a lot about Kenpo. And that's the problem, and the quality suffers. So, you know, there's many ways to do the art, but especially, like, there's people who say, oh, we do Ed Parker's Kenpo. And then I'll ask them some simple questions that they don't know. I say, well, you're sure you're doing Ed Parker's Kenpo? Because you don't know anything about it, you know. You're doing the techniques the way it says in the book, and, you know, you're reading what it says, but that's about it. And if you read Mr. Parker's Infinite Insights, for example, very little bit, almost nothing really, just a few techniques are written down, how to do them with photos, just for as an example, but again, to break down the principles. What is Infinite Insights is Mr. Parker's mindset and philosophy about martial arts and how he views martial arts and how he does and teaches it. So to ignore what's in the material and not to do it that way is really not doing Parker's Kenpo. And there's a lot of people that are very high-ranking black belts that don't know fundamental Kenpo principles. And, you know, if I could do that, I'd send them back to school.
Yeah.
Sorry, but that's, you know, that's true. You know, I mean, we all could learn a lot. You know, there's a lot to learn for everybody, but, you know, there's just some people that you can tell never had a lesson with anybody who knows anything, or, you know, do a little bit here, see a video there, and that's, you know, the media is a blessing and a curse, because I remember my instructor had, you know, original instructor when I started with in Towson, Jim Frederick, he had a lot of tapes from a lot of seminars, and those things were hard to come by. Mr. Parker didn't really allow a lot of recording, so to get footage of him, you know, now you go on YouTube, you type in at Parker Kenpo, and you get, you know, links after links after links. This was like gold back then. You had to know somebody who knows somebody to get you a copy. So nowadays you have the exposure, but you also have the exposure of the state of the art. And the state of the art is, I'm not going to say it's good or bad, because I don't like to be pessimistic, or I don't like to say, well, only these people or that people have it. There's a lot of good martial artists out there, but there's a lot of bad ones. And it's good that more people are doing martial arts, but however, it's just like everything else, the quality needs to be there. So overall, I think the biggest thing in Kenpo is people, you know, if I could go back and maybe, you know, is to make sure that everybody who's teaching has at least a good grasp of the foundations before they open up a school, where it's a requisite, you know, not just, you know, saying I want to get into it, but you have to pass a test that will be upheld. In other words, these are the requirements you have to know. Not these are the requirements, you don't know them, but go ahead and do it, and then we'll teach them to you later. Because that never happened. That did happen even in Mr. Parker's days. There's footage of it out there of him saying that, unfortunately, and, you know, it is what it is, but that's what got things out of hand. And if I could change one thing, that would be it, you know.
And what do you think, how could a beginner find out if he's studying under a good instructor, especially with all of those 10th degrees out there, now in the Kenpo world? How could I, as a beginner, find out, see, oh, am I really in a good school with a good instructor? Is it even possible to kind of detect that as a beginner?
It's hard. It's hard because everything looks impressive when you don't know. You know, it's like taking a starving man off the street and say, here, what do you think of this? And he's just happy to have a meal because he's starving, you know. So, you know, if you feed him for 6 months and ask him the same question, he might give you a completely different answer. So it's always a little bit of a gamble, but you have to do your homework. And that's a problem as well, because everybody, we have a saying, doesn't matter how good or bad something is, it'll have a following, and it'll have people saying good stuff about it and bad. But overall in Kenpo, there is a way to cross-reference. If you ask several people about a person, you should be able to get, especially if they're from different areas or a certain lineage, you should be able to get a fair assessment. But ultimately, humans have this like self-protection instinct. So I always tell, trust your instinct. Because I remember, even for myself, you learn some techniques and you say, I know it's part of the curriculum and I have to do it, but I don't know if I would want to do it in the street. It just does not feel right. I don't think I could pull it off. So you teach it the same way. You just hope, when it's your turn to teach your student, you just say, hey, do this. And, if you can't get it very much, don't worry. I can't either. But, you just kind of brush it under the rug and skip over. And we all had it. And that's what I'm saying. When I met Mr. Planas, he was able to explain it, so I understood the background of why the technique was created, how come, what it was there to show, the good, the bad, and the in-between, and ultimately how to use your brain in deciding what is good and what is bad. And a lot of that is, like I said, subjective, but that's why we have all these options, so you can choose. So we say, no, not one thing fits everybody. So we always give options. But as a beginner, trust your gut. If you're doing stuff that you say, I just don't know, I don't have confidence in it, maybe there is something to it. Even, some instructors want to promote people every month. They say, yeah, you're doing great. Yeah, here's another stripe. Yeah, let's test it. Here's another belt. And it is what it is. It's out there. But I've had a lot of people who come to me. I tell people I have hardly any students of my own. Most of my students are black belts from other schools that come to me and say, hey, I heard about you, or I saw you, or I read somewhere, and we start working, and they say, man, oh my God, I knew nothing, all of a sudden, opens up a big, mess. But I just tell them, I said, slow and steady, go back, and this is not about my way or your way. Another thing I love about Mr. Planas is he never taught me to do anything because I said so or you have to. He gives you the reason and the how comes of why, he learned from Ed Parker and why it's done that way in the Ed Parker system. And I try to teach the same way. Even when people discuss the art online, I always tell them, don't just say, well, my instructor said so, or Huck Planas said so, or, whoever. If you understand the art well enough, stand on your own 2 feet, just like you will have to fight on your own 2 feet. Your instructor is not going to be there to coach you or help you. You will have to do it on your own. So if you discuss the art, discuss it on your own, have confidence in it, and learn to, handle yourself. So going back to the question, how do you know? You don't. But if something doesn't feel right, don't just say, well, it's me. Sometimes it is. Sometimes you have to work through it, because it's not hard, but it's not easy, and it takes time and dedication. But keep an open mind. And if you say, okay, well, I want to go see this seminar, and be aware of instructors say, oh no, I don't want you to go anywhere else, or I don't want you to train with anybody else, or listen to anybody else, or see anybody else. Because in our lineage, we always say, well, you make up your own mind. You know what to, you know the reasons why we do it. If, the rest is up to you. It's like being in love. You cannot force somebody to be in love with you. Either they are or they're not. So, martial arts, it's the same thing. Go out there and see what's out there. Go out there, and like I said, 2 things will happen. Either you'll learn something, or you'll get confidence in what you're doing because you say, hey, well, I know better. But it's a learning process, and picking a school is sometimes a learning process too. But that's also experience. Experience, you can walk into a school and you say, man, that guy is great. And then you learn more and you say, oh, maybe some things are not so great. and then you start training with other people, maybe, or you from other sources, or you just grow in the art, and you say, okay, well, yeah, I need to do something else. So, and if you get lucky, you stay there, and you just, you end up home. Like he said, that can happen, right away or not, but ultimately, remember, it's a martial art, and say, do I think this could save my butt, in a fight, realistically? So realism is what it's all about, because out there it's real. So
Yeah, we're happy that it's real, that you are here this weekend with us to share your knowledge. Once again, thank you for being here. It's an honor. Thank you for having this conversation with us. It's time to wrap it up. Once again, thank you, and yeah, let's have a good time. And
my pleasure. It's a fantastic event. Just very happy to be a part of it. On many levels, and seeing a lot of new faces and some old friends, and like I said, just a family gathering, and we do what we do, and learn and grow from all of us. Learn and grow from it, and thank you for having me, and glad to be here.